So it's my role to welcome you all to this Parliamentary Friends Group meeting on behalf of the steering committee that has organised the speakers and content for today's meeting. That is MCFS Australia, ME Action Network Australia, ME Group Australia, and Encourage Australia. I'm delighted to welcome you to this very important meeting, which the voices of those with lived experience will be front and centre. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country throughout Australia and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters and community. And today we meet on the lands of the Nullarbor people and our neighbours and towns past, present and those in attendance. Minister, the Honourable Mark Butler, Senator Jordan Steele John, Chair of this Parliamentary CFS Group, Members of Parliament, Advisors, Departmental Officials, Chair of Emerge Australia, Mr Mark Crisby, and importantly, members of the Australian NCFS and Long community. A warm welcome to all in attendance today and also to the 180 people who are attending online. 2024 is an historic year for people with NCFS. Historic because this community waited 22 years to receive the much-awaited landmark announcement delivered by the Minister regarding the allocation of $1.1 million to update Australia's clinical guidelines for NCFS. And we'll hear more about that behind the scene later on. There were tears of joy tinged with a huge sadness for many that this community had waited so long for a decision so critical to the diagnosis, management and treatment of NCFS in Australia. Tears because the community need answers. Tears because they need the gaslighting by doctors to stop. Tears because patients need to be believed they are not making it up. Tears because they need to be seen, need to be heard, and tears because they do not have equitable access to services and all forms of support. In an age where we are committed to social inclusion, those within the NCFS in this country continue to be left out. Less than 10% of people with NCFS return to pre-illness functioning, yet evidence suggests these patients are made to feel that they just don't matter. This has to change. Today, we seek further targeted investment from government to address each individual element outlined in Recommendation 8 of the Long COVID Inquiry Report, greater support for patients, funds for NCFS research, and importantly, clinical education for GPs. Minister, on the 20th of June this year, you gave Australia's 250,000 people with NCFS hope that you have seen them and you have heard them. Today, we wish to build on that by speaking with one voice to ensure that every Australian with NCFS receives effective medical and allied health services and social and welfare supports without stigma or discrimination. Thank you for being with us here today. We understand this is an awfully busy time for you. We're delighted you're here, and I'm now really pleased to invite you to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Thank you all for being here. It's the final fortnight of the year. So we're all being a bit scratchy, 2,000 yard stairs. You'll understand why we're delighted to be able to spend some time with all of you. This is such an important community one that I've really treasured getting to know in my few years back in the health portfolio since we were in opposition and then coming to that as well. So thank you, Anne, for what you're saying in those discussions. They're easy to be online. Some of them are a bit more face-to-face now want to acknowledge that we're coming together on the last number of member people, and I expect their elders, past, present, and emerging, particularly important acknowledgement in healthcare audits, given that your example health outcomes are life expectancy still between non-Indigenous and Indigenous Australians. And I want to thank a number of parliamentarians as well, Jordan, the Greens Party of spokesperson, Michelle Nader, who was a member of the long-COVID inquiry on the health committee, and Zoe who as well takes a really deep interest in health issues, not just in her, but nationally as well. That inquiry, although we've had these discussions before, the Health Committee of the House of Reps decided to take on long COVID as their first inquiry in Parliament. I'm delighted they did that. We have had some of these discussions before, but I think it is the case that the focus on long COVID as a post-infection syndrome really did lift the issues associated with NECFS up the list, and that, a very dark cloud is perhaps still lying over the last couple of years. Because you are right, although there are a number of recommendations in the inquiry that go to long COVID in particular, we allowed the committee to survey this area more generally and make a number of recommendations that touch particularly on issues that the NECFS committee has been talking about for a very long time. Right up the top of that list, Dan, as you pointed out, is the very high nature of the guidelines that are being governing healthcare response to people living with NECFS. I am delighted we were able to respond to that quickly. I know that will be an important issue of substance for the community, but it's also symbolically important, I think, to demonstrate that this building in this government has heard the community. And 22 years is far too long to have a set of guidelines that the community, frankly, has had very low confidence in for so long to endure. So I'm really looking forward to that. I know you've got the NHRC here to give you a bit of an update, and we're looking forward to that. So thank you for that as well. I think, again, you sort of stole with my thunder there, so it's good to be here and see you all, but I'm not adding much to what Adam's already said. The importance of frontline primary care healthcare professionals in this space is worth restating. You said it. It's right at the centre of everything we are trying to do to strengthen Medicare. So to recognise that the job of GPs and GP-led primary care teams is much harder than it was 20, 30 years ago. There are more complex chronic conditions, there's a lot more mental health challenges in the community. They are working harder with this sort of tsunami of information and challenge coming through their rooms. So to any extent we can lift their understanding of the cutting edge science and guidelines around the treatment of this condition and other conditions like POTS and long COVID and fibromyalgia and others as well. I think we're not just doing the patient community a service, and that is obviously our main job, but we're doing a very stretched primary care sector a service as well by making sure that they have the best information available at their fingertips. So I want to thank the group up on the screen of advocates for your patience, your endurance, your relentless, but very constructive advice, not just to Labor, but to parliamentarians right across the political spectrum about the long overdue nature of the Parliament having a look at this area and putting some resources behind the update of the clinical guidelines in particular. I know that's not the end of it, you already foreshadowed that, and nor should it be, because the guidelines are really an enabler. And I look forward to having further discussions with you and with the other groups up on the screen about how we can continue to do much better by a large community of maybe 250,000 Australians who need their support, from this building, but also from the healthcare sector. Thank you all for coming along. I'm not going to be able to say the whole thing. I've got another speech in 5 minutes. But such is the nature of the final fortnight of the calendar sitting. But I really want to thank you for coming up here. I know it's a long haul for many of you to get here. Some of you might be in Canberra, it's not such a long haul for you. But for many of you, coming here and telling your stories is just so important. We as parliamentarians get a lot of pieces of paper, a lot of reports and briefings and so on to read, and they are really valuable. But there are some substitute having a conversation with someone. It sticks in your mind for years. It really does sometimes. So thank you for taking the effort to come here to engage not just in this meeting, but I imagine you're fanning out and trying to have a discussion with a number of MPs, senators, maybe their staff as well. I hope you recognise the effort is worth it. It does make a very big difference. In a very competitive field, there's a lot of issues that are being tossed around in this building right now. It does make a big difference for you to take the effort to come and talk to us. I know it is an effort, but it is worthwhile. So thank you very much. All the best for the rest of your session, and we'll no doubt get some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. I know how many of those in the room here today, and I believe we've got about 178 online as well, retaking management, the belief, but also the commitment to action and how that will make a difference. So I'm very much appreciated. I'm Peter Lange, and it's my honour to be here today and seeing us wrap the next 2 hours for this parliamentary event. If I can add also my acknowledgement for the traditional owners of the land which we meet here today in Canberra, the Ngunnawal people, but also recognise that we have community from across Australia, and so also want to acknowledge the elders on which they join us from today. I was really thrilled when Anne asked me to be here today. I have 2 members of my family who are living with NCFS. I still remember my aunt being diagnosed when I was probably less than 5. She was living in Tennant Creek at the time, and there was about 3 that were all diagnosed within close succession. In speaking with my aunt just recently, because I mentioned to her that I was going to be coming here today, she's had for about 25 years now, and she said she's often spoken that when she was at her absolute worst, she said, I could be lying in bed, the room could be on fire, and there was nothing I would be able to do to get myself out of the mess. And I think even as a teenager, that cut through really strongly about what that impact is today. So I definitely want to compliment what the Minister said about how important those stories and those experiences are, and we've got a wonderful agenda that brings them back to the fore today. I'd definitely like to acknowledge the community that is joining us today. As I was saying, I think we've got about 178 in total. I've been really fortunate throughout 15 years. I've got to work in healthcare advocacy on a lot of different issues. The experience has taught me that collaboration is key to actually driving any change. Too often in healthcare, change is really slow. We all experience that. But coming together, speaking in one voice, and I think as the Minister was saying, that kind of commitment to having to do so over and over again is really, really critical. So I want to recognise that today is actually one of those landmark opportunities where we do have a number of groups in the room looking at how do we come together, speak with one voice, and take an advocacy to government. So I'd like to acknowledge all the groups that are here today and how important that is. We have a significant agenda today which will culminate with that really clear call to action to ensure that the 250 Australians with ME, CFS, 250,000, my God, I made a mistake already. 250,000 Australians receive the effective, the evidence-based services, healthcare and support without stigma and discrimination. I think that's what was saying this morning. We've got experts, we have those with lived experience that are looking at the full kind of critical elements. So the knowledge around general practice, inequity and access to government services, the importance of the research investment, and I think we were talking about this before we started, and what that access to patient support and access to allied health services really look like. Some really quick housekeeping, and I have to thank Senator Steele-John because he's already done half of it for me. We've gone through the bathroom conversation, so I won't re-echo that. But this conversation is very much designed to be a discussion. There are a lot of people joining us from online, we have a number of people in the room, and we encourage you to put questions on the table. There will be opportunities after each speaker to be able to do so. For those online, we are really encouraging to use the chat function. As part of that, we do also acknowledge that experiences are really personal. We ask for everyone to be patient, to be respectful, and to ensure that the experience of being able to take these questions is a positive experience for all.
We also, as the Minister already acknowledged, we've got a number of MPs in the room. It's going to be very hectic couple of sitting weeks. As Senator was referring earlier, next week will be even worse. Girls are going to go off. The agenda will continue. You get very used to having food coming in and out. So, with all of that behind us, and we thank the Minister as he walks out of the room, I would like to introduce our first video of the session. So I'd like to introduce Megan and Angus from South Australia, who will provide their perspective. I would really like to thank MECFS Australia South Australia for sharing this video with us, which has been supported by Honorary Emily Burke, MLC, so South Australia's Assistant Minister for Autism and her team. Thank you, Jane.
People don't know what it is, so you end up saying, oh, it's chronic fatigue syndrome.
My name is Angus, and I'm 23.
22.
Oh, I forgot.
Same. It's an unknown journey to begin with, because you just see a change in your child's function without a clear understanding. So Angus is our 3 of 4 boys. They're really close in age. He was just a regular kid, pretty happy kid, healthy, really healthy actually. Loved learning, was really curious. There was so much potential actually. So we first noticed it when he, I guess, lost focus with his learning. That was a bit unusual for him. He was such an independent learner. We really did focus on his mental health because that was where we were led. And I wished that we were given the opportunity to look at his physical health. That was missing, and that's a frustration. But that's the limitation of the system. That's not necessarily individual practitioners' loss. It's they have nothing to go on, so that comes back to the guidelines. Even like trying to talk to Angus about the pain was a big issue for him. He had horrendous amount of pain for a long time. I'd ask him what your pain scale is, and he didn't even know how to give it one because he was always in pain. And the only time I knew that it was like really, really painful was because he would express that it was unbearable. Socially, I would say it's probably about 6-7 years. That's not just leaving home, that's joining the family at the table. His 21st, nearly broke my heart. We had mum up for coffee, and that was it. And he lasted 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and he had to go. Those milestones are hard. Even the stupid Year 12 jumper, you know, with their names on the back. He didn't get to have that. And it's such a minor, silly thing, but they're part of our, kids' culture. And so, not that he might not have even wanted to go to the graduation. He wasn't that kind of kid, but he should have been included. He should have been allowed to have that. When you're quite unwell, it's the light goes out in your eyes, and it's, there's nobody home, and there really isn't anyone there. And I can see that in his photos. There's an age where it topples over, and that's always really sad because, kids should have shiny, bright eyes that are full of hope, and it just isn't there. It's not an illness that is biased towards wealth or anything. That it literally can happen to children falling for a healthy, active, vibrant people become unwell. People in their retired years become unwell. It's just it can happen to anyone. And being healthy and having a full-on active life doesn't prevent it from happening to you. If you're one of those unlucky people, it'll take you.
Senator for Western Australia, Senator Jordan Steele-John. Senator Steele-John is one of the strongest advocates for disability rights and for equitable healthcare for all Australians in our Parliament. He's the Green spokesman for health, as the Minister suggested beforehand, disability rights and services, foreign affairs, and peace and youth at the disarmament. So if you think someone's busy, this is probably one of the gentlemen who is. His goal is to challenge the boundaries of political norms, both in the Senate and the community, and create a much more accessible and inclusive society for us all. And he's obviously our co-chair of the Parliamentary Council for NECFS. Senator, we're thrilled to have you here today to speak, and I'd like to introduce you for a couple of words.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. And it is a pleasure and privilege to be here in this role today. And I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on First Nations land, on the more neighbouring land, and pay respects to relatives past and present, as well as sovereignty over this land of their city. I think it is fitting that I begin with a particular statement to those who are joining us online, because I know from my own experience of disability, of inaccessibility, of what it feels like when you even a place or space or your body prevent you from being in a room. There's often a frustration and sadness and anger that occurs even sometimes in hybrid events. You know, but you're more there than if there wasn't the Zoom, but you're still not where you might otherwise want to be. And I just want to say particularly you are seen and heard in this meeting by myself and the Greens, as much as everybody here in this room. Thank you for giving your time to engage yourself in this discussion, to observe it, because that takes effort and energy, and that's very much seen in this room as well. To everybody, whether you are physically present or present online, I feel an obligation to extend an apology on behalf of the institution that I am part of, and as a senator, as an elected representative, even as somebody who has used this space to advocate for the community for as long as I've been here. There is no escaping the fact that when a fair-minded person looks at the history of my own successful and my life as an Australian, so much that the community has experienced and continues to experience is actually the direct result of either the passive failure of people in this building in positions of power to provide direct social support, to provide financial funding to either research or peak body and advocacy organisations, or the active sharing from spaces like this of narratives and ideas about either the community specifically or the citizens in the general sense, which stigmatise people. And through the propagation of that stigma, reinforce trauma and make it more difficult to journey as a human in the world. And I am committed, and the Greens are committed to challenging that stigma and those preconceived ideas and those myths at every single opportunity. We must get rid of this idea that a human being is only valuable and worthy of being listened to, let alone seen by the political process, if they can engage in certain physical activities or expenditures of mental energy. Every human being has inherent worth and deserves to experience at the base level love and support, compassionate kindness, the safety to feel sad, and connection to community. And from their government, they deserve active, engaged work. It is great to be here, and it is great to have been part of organising this, But it is outrageous that a community of people who are either directly affected by or journey alongside family members who experience a condition, one of the primary results of which is massive challenges with being physically present in spaces, finding the energy to do, have had to put so much work in organising these kind of events to be able to get something done. It is good that we are reviewing the practice guidelines after 22 years, but also we should reflect on the fact that between 250 and 500,000 Australians dealing with this condition, and so far we've had a round of research funding in 2020, and I know we're going to hear more about the practice guidelines, but there still is not that level of urgency that I think there needs to be from government. The reality that even as we sit here now, people are deeply struggling with this condition and its impacts, and flow through implications for their lives. There has to be the energy and the willingness to move, and I have watched this place move, and it will move in the course of the next 2 weeks. You will see legislation of significant size and scope passed through this building like it had been covered in grease and shot down the hallway. I've seen something go from a media report to a piece of legislation in 4 days. Somebody put a needle in a strawberry in my first year, and by the end of the sitting, we had a new criminal legislation piece passed in relation to the penalty for putting a needle in the strawberry. This place can move. If it wants to move, it should, and it can. So we need to have that action. In the last election, and I'll finish here, because of course the Green support recommendation goes without saying. Of course there needs to be those urgently and directly delivered social supports. That goes without saying, because if you are experiencing it right now, the fact that somebody has received money for a research grant to develop something and might deliver something in 5 or 10 years is hope for the future, but people do need direct support. Now, of course, that needs to happen. And in the last election, we also argued for a super league, which absolutely needed a national summit on NECFS to bring together all parts of government and all departments for a nationally coordinated response. I don't usually endorse a talk fest, but to be quite frank, there is not a shared understanding across this government that the practice guidelines are being reviewed, and are therefore reference to the current practice guidelines, the 22-year-old ones, probably isn't appropriate from the National Disability Insurance Agency or from Services Australia or other entities. So we do need that coordinated response. We're coming up to an election. And we've just heard, seen on that screen, 250,000 Australians, potentially up to 500,000 people. That is a lot of people. That is a lot of votes. Because each one of those family members have friends in a connected community. That gives you power. And I will finish by saying, use that power on election day. Let your MPs know that whether or not they are filled with the urgency that is required will determine how you vote. And let them know that if they continue to fail to act and continue to spread discriminatory thought processes about the community, that will have an electoral consequence for them. So thank you very much for your continued work, your continued support. Our Greens movement sees the community, we recognise the community, we are alongside you in this fight, and will continue until there is the support, the recognition, the research, funding that is so urgently needed.
Thank you, Sam. I very much appreciate those words, but also, I guess, words of encouragement for the things that we have to do ahead in the next maybe 6 months. I'm not quite sure it's going to be quite 6 months.
Oh, I don't think it'll be
Maybe 3 months.
get my 50 ready for a summer election. and the thought process.
We're going to turn our focus because I'm getting a nice little message from Jane. We're already running behind, so we'll try and skip through. We'll turn our focus to the first of the four priority areas, and you've heard a lot about this before in terms of the emphasis on clinical guidelines. I would like to welcome Ms. Singh, who's representing the NHMRC as their Executive Director of Research Quality and Advice, who will speak about the process of where they've gotten to and the work that is ahead of clinical guidelines. Mr. Singh has held a range of senior management roles throughout his career and mostly in health policy. Within the NHMRC, his work focuses on research translation, including public health guidelines, such as at the moment, environmental health and Indigenous health policy, including supporting Indigenous health research. His team is also responsible for the frameworks that support quality, integrity, and ethics in health and medical research. It's a very solid amount of work under his belt. We will have an opportunity for questions towards the end of this session. So for those particularly online or in the room, if there are things that come up during it, please do take it. But I'd like to welcome Mr. Singh. Thank you.
Thank you. And, hello everybody in the room, and we'll keep focused on that. So at NHMRC, we are delighted to be able to finally start work on NECFS that we have provided funding for earlier this year. We're a small agency. Part of our role is developing guidelines and working with evidence. We don't get to do all the things that we'd like to do, and I know it's been a long wait for people. We see things people say on Twitter and other forums, and we're very aware of the stress and the difficulties that the delay has caused you, and so apologize for that. But we are now able to start on the process of the guidelines work, and we've kicked that off with a lot of consultation, including with Emerge Australia, NECFS Australia, a number of other groups, including Bridges and Pathways, the Australian POTS Foundation, and the Connective Tissue Disorders Network Australia. We've also talked to the College of GPs and the College of Physicians. Consultation is built into our legislation as part of how we approach things, and so there will be other opportunities for people to engage widely with the process, including a consultation in relation to the scope of the guideline, which we expect to be holding around about the middle of next year, and then we will actually put out the full guideline in draft form for, again, anyone who can provide comments on, and that should happen in late 2027. We're working now on assembling the committee that will work on the guidelines. While it's probably a little bit early for me to announce any of the names, we are basically looking at a GP chair, but also there will be wide representation from consumers. There will be at least 2 to 3 consumers on that committee, in addition to researchers and various specialists, including areas like sleep fatigue, guideline methods, and so on. So hopefully you will hear from us in the next few weeks about the committee and who's on that. So I mentioned that the major milestones there will be the consultation on the scope in public consultation on the scope in the middle of next year, and then the draft guidelines towards the end of 2027. And then we hope to finish the guideline process in the early 2028. So, yeah, I know that's a reasonable time to wait, but the way we develop guidelines is through a very careful and expected and evidence-based process that also involves various quality checks. And of course, all this consultation, which does the process takes respect. Lastly, I know something that people want to know, and that is what about brain exercise therapy and how that makes it work and not figure into guidelines. And so at NHMRC we are guided by the evidence, and I can't tell you where we will end up on this, because we haven't looked at the evidence. We need to form the committee needs to
go through it and form their own views. But we have heard loud and clear from consumers about.
Sorry, can you just clarify, you haven't looked at the PACE trial that that's based on?
We have not formally gone through as part of the guideline development process, and so that's what we need to do.
But you will do it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I mean, there's a lot of contention that's obviously that was still clarify.
Yeah. As I'm saying, I just want to acknowledge that we have heard loud and clear things that people have said about where exercise therapy, the harms that it causes, and the exertion on the base. And so that will be absolutely part of the process, and part of the process is also looking at values and preferences and harms and benefits. So,
And what involvement do you have with the community? Because I'm interested in our entire community and obviously categorically on this case the medical profession. We're not very much great friends with a lot of researchers, certain ones we're more favourable towards because we've been harmed. So in terms of engagement with our experiences, because we're not likely to give feedback readily, how are you seeking to overcome that barrier?
this is one of the reasons we've already started that consultation within the academics, if Australia and so on. And that's another of the reasons why we will have at least 2 or 3 consumers on this group. It's not going to be a token consumer representation involved. And then there's, of course, the consultation where everybody, and I've said, I hope that many people with the experience of the CFS will be able to contribute that way as well. And that's really all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Conscious of having a couple of questions in the room already. I think it was actually a question we had online, so we've doubled up on that one. Just in terms of if there's any other questions that you see what's coming in. Oh, so great question. So with the current guidelines for the next 3 to 4 years, what is that, what happens with the current guidelines for the next 3 to 4 years? So many more people will be harmed by them at this time. So I think what's that kind of nice middle ground we have in the meantime?
I think a lot of people think that NHMRC has guidelines on NCFS, but we don't and we never have. The guidelines that most people talk about are the 2002 College Physician Guidelines that were published a year ago.
I'll also just raise is it involved the trauma response from traumatised communities, because that's affecting a lot of the ways that our community engages with everybody, carers, medical researchers, and particularly medical professionals and allied health professionals. As in, we don't talk publicly about our real experience. We have a whole different version when we see a doctor. Right. And then we talk very differently privately. We have safe doctors list and there's not many names on them. Right, which is a bit of concern for me because I know the other people are harmful doctors and I'd like that to change, I guess. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a new research and understanding about the traumatised impacts of people experiencing these kind of systematic oppression and the way they present. And how are you seeking to address that kind of concern? Because the appease and please response when we come into contact with, say, medical professionals or the doctor or the carer is totally not representative of what our actual experience is. Because often we're dependent on that person, particularly now with the NDIS. I'm dependent on abusive relationships with doctors because I've reprove my disability. I've got right documentation, I'll put up the abuse, I get no medical assistance. It's incredibly exhausting. I've got to pay carers, I've got to maintain all these relationships and then write 5 doctors that I pay for plus 25 allied health professional documentation for the legislation, and a lot of those relationships are abusive. Us maintaining this now that the NDIS that I have to reprove this country for. And this is a thing that's going through our community. And the traumatic responses and the way we interact with doctors prior to that was not realistic of what we've done. Because we know we have to kind of sanitise it for the doctors. Like we have to appease the doctor, make them feel good, so we get some treatment, hopefully if they've got some expertise that may be useful. And we behave totally differently. And within our community we discuss this. But a lot of the time it's an unconscious process. And that kind of trauma response is very documented, it's understood. Is there a process in what you're doing to accommodate for the presentation of people which may not be representative of their experience and that trust level?
It's going to be a guideline diagnosis for those management, and therefore interactions with medical professionals is going to be an important part of it. So I'm very happy to say that we will be looking
get that kind of literature and evidence.
There's a new, this new, talked about this, there's new evidence and documentation about, that in the global context about this kind of community, which is really relevant for our business. And it's really important, so I was important to say a friend who wants to be my assistant, call her, but she won't talk to him. And he's right, I'm vouch for her, but she, you know, it's that, just that level of trust.
I'm conscious of just time, and I know there's a couple more questions that we've got coming in as well, so if there are.
So Sarah Fitzgerald, MC Invest Australia too. I was wondering if there's any process in choosing these people who are going to spend the next 4 years working for us effectively. Is there any process in the transparency of that, or any transparency in the process, sorry, of that, of who is going on those, in those groups? Because there's quite a lot of names that are just flown past our paper, where we're going, oh my God, that's one of those people who are so anti-us and as patients on the patient. And we're concerned that people representing us.
And we've had that already, and
Already,
these
yeah.
people there.
And there's names.
There's careers that sustain on these things, and I know these people are saying, like, they've got an active, their career is based on this stuff. So they're not going to say, okay, there's evidence against this in my career, which will upset my academic tenure. Right?
Let's give this a second chance. I think,
Yeah,
I think there's always a very diverse range of opinions that are here, but
yeah, this is our community, and this will affect very much and be very much pivotal to the concerns of people, because we've had legislation for the NDIS based on things in the community that are unfolding. And respected professionals who are not respected by patients.
let's give a chance.
Yeah.
We're very aware that's an issue. We are not proposing to have open public consultation in relation to the quantities that we need, but this is, it's fair to say, one of the reasons we are engaging with the various groups who are engaging.
And we'll have a consultation throughout as well. Absolutely, just make sure you get a wide opinions.
What will bring the closeness that you'll use to select for?
Yeah, and those groups and so
That's, I think, the centre of the question.
Thank you.
So, we have what we do is we sit down and we look at the range of things we think the driver is likely to cover, and then we try and work out what sort of expertise we're going to need for that. And then we basically look for individuals who have the expertise in those required fields. And then we do, of course, try to balance things like gender and representation geographically and things like that.
how are you going to do that with 3 patients?
And I said, people to our best. You can't, achieve perfect results for everything, but it is something we can't do.
Jeffrey, can I just throw a very quick question in here and then I'll move to the second one.
Jeff Horman, MEC for Legal Resources. You are doing a scope, with that scope, we're going to be examining the issue of, for example, engaging with patients for purposes of NDIS and purposes of social security. There's one of the biggest problems, of course, is we have a 6-minute window with the GPs. They are important, critical elements of the guideline that doesn't deal with management of the actual patient. It needs to deal with the issues outside of that, because getting access to their previous reports is one of the major issues. And it's not only that, it's also insurance issues. They have been used against us. The ACP guidelines do have an element there that does cover some of that issue. Probably the only thing I could say was reasonable about them. They were never fit for purpose the day they came out. They ignored the patient community, they ignored the organisations. What you're hearing here are people that are saying choosing the wrong people will be a repetition of the past.
Yeah, it's been done before and we're upset about it. And like our entire community, like I've had to go through processes that will set my health back 2 years to qualify for social things to survive, right? We've been put through like decades of this, so people are really struggle. And like that's why the emphasis is there. And like I've worked in medical schools, I've worked in medical schools when I was first, and there is no education for researchers, for doctors, for specialists, for anyone. And that's a problem, right? So, like, coming from a medical background or research background, I'm kind of going, how can you engage this people that's covered previously? And obviously that's a much broader scope, but it's an area of concern for us on a massive level.
I'll just put down on that one. Sorry.
So I don't think this is going anywhere, so I think we are.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of these other things, but just consideration.
I think it's an important conversation to have, and I want to acknowledge that the NHS
I think it's a little bigger issue than just the cans and this.
The takeaway that I'm getting.
Yes.
Very much.
If I may, just probably the most important thing of it that led us to this group in the first place. Little guidelines having an outline of the review process. So that they are reviewed on an ongoing basis in a way that is transparent, not a singular individual.
And the selection process, the review process of when you come up with something, what that kind of thing, yeah, I think that's.
Not a singular individual. What I'm saying is that's something that will be in the process. You know, so what I did with guidelines, the guidelines was written and said every 25 years and not with hours if they have nothing like that.
I can't guarantee that, but again, this is a very good school. And one last thing that the student might be very interested to know is that we recently received written confirmation from the RSCP that their LACFS guideline is no longer recommended to use. That was an assumption because it was so long, but we never stopped.
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate you coming today. We appreciate this early in the process that there is work that needs to be done at the front to set it up. I think you can all recognise it is set up well. And it's in a stress situation, but to get the best outcome possible. So thank you very much. Also, thank you for the questions. If I move to the second part of the conversation, which I think the Minister actually talked about this morning, which is guidelines is one thing. And having them put in place, having the awareness and the understanding amongst the general practice community is obviously absolutely critical. And I know that this is probably having worked with patients a lot, this is the most kind of piece that often comes up is their experience around the facility. So first, I'd like to thank Nicola and Bruce who have a video that that will be shown on the screens around you. Again, supported by the South Australian team. So I wanted to show this video first.
Well, we're trying to raise some awareness about fibromyalgia and CFS. Nicola's our daughter, she's 42. She has always been a very active and involved person, involved in all sorts of things. She was a teacher originally, she's got a couple of degrees, and then she moved into retail business, and then she decided to start up farm-stay accommodation and wedding venue. However, 2 years ago the wheels fell off, and since then she's been basically 24/7 care. We really never knew exactly what was wrong until the last 2 years. She's had every test known to man, and none of the medical profession could actually put a label on it. After you exhaust every other test, they decide you've got fibromyalgia and CFS. There's hope that one day she'll get better, but there is no timeline. Well, it was challenging to the extent that all the tests she has to have done are basically at a specialist in Adelaide, or though in hospitals. And hospitals are the worst place for people suffering from this sort of illness. Hospitals can't cater for them at all. They actually make them worse, because hospitals are noisy places, and noise is one of the huge problems for people suffering from this. We're 2 hours from Adelaide, so we have to get her there, give her a day to recover, get to the specialist, give her a day to recover, and then come home. So, and the family challenges that go with that were significant. I'd have to say that when she was in the RAH, the care she got was exemplary, but the nursing staff particularly don't understand the fact that you can't have noise, and you have to have a lot of quiet time, and you can't have people speaking in your ear every 30 seconds because you can't handle that. So they were sort of challenging things for us. Probably the biggest problem is there are very few people in the medical profession who actually understand the issue. And it's probably not their fault. In the country, the GPs basically have no idea. That they're very nice people and they do very well with normal GP work, but with what Nicola's got wrong with her, they can't help at all. I just really think it's important that people find out about this illness rather than make assumptions. And that's been probably the thing that's hurt us most, is that people make assumptions with no information. We need to get it out there.
Hi, Emily. There's so much I would like to say, but I don't have the capacity. I just want to thank you so much for bringing attention to this horrific illness. It turned off the lights of my life 3 years ago. And it has been 3 years of indescribable suffering, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's taken everything from me except my breath and the love I have for my family. We've seen so many doctors, specialists, practitioners, and they all know it's real. They know I'm absolutely my body has shut down and they have no idea what to do about it. So we go home and then it takes me weeks to recover from that visit. And we keep going. That's all I can say, but thank you for trying to get help for the people that suffer from this illness. People that have fallen through the cracks of the medical system.
Feel like very delicate because, like, our carers and people, our families are really important. They have a really important story. It's just different than ours. Yeah, and it's really, there's a lot of stuff there in all areas of human rights and representation. We need to be self-represented. And like, I'll tell you, this is my activity. This is a good day for him. That's long. Like, this is a good day. Whitney's been in a room. This is a lovely day. 5 hours looking great. But he's been in a room for 9 years. We chat. We can communicate with Whitney if we want. You know, like, it's not easy because we couldn't communicate for 9 years. But, like, we can all represent in certain ways if reasonable accommodations are made and they need to be. Yeah, so I just want to put that there because, yeah, it's really important. There's a lot of conflict within families and it's different. Yeah, really important.
And it's a disease that really affects the whole family. It affects the line. But it's not just us. It's our children, it's our husbands,
And the dynamics in relationships.
We were talking about this earlier, and I did use your life, it's your own experience, and parents have their own experience, and siblings have their own
So when we count 250,000 known cases, we've got to multiply that by 4 on the average family.
And I think the thing is with this group, we have to kind of focus on patients and not the people around them. They're important, but in terms of their own stories, we need to make sure that we qualify those people in whichever way that they're able to communicate and their own ways. So that's really important. I think, you know, carers and family members are also important, the distinction between different stories.
completely agree. I'd like to welcome Professor Scheffel. Richard, who's obviously the medical director at Parliamentary Australia, to speak about the kind of the call for clinical education and why it's really advanced. Again, I don't think I need to say in this room why it's important. I think we all recognise. And what I'm also very conscious of is there is going to be a lot of individual experience on this issue. And I think if we can keep focused around where this needs to go, why this needs to be the priority, and how we cut through in this advocacy environment at the moment, I think that's critical. Obviously, we started with Merge Australia in 2022 after graduating from university. I hate when we're putting that 1978. I really want to have 1978. But obviously, an incredibly distinguished career in primary care before specialising in complex and chronic diseases, especially ME/CFS. Widely acknowledged in terms of a 2010 nomination for Australian of the Year, and also 2017 with an OEM for the work in terms of infectious disease. Richard, to speak to the room.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
I do. Well, that's why I'm here. So, look, I've been involved for 46 years, and I'm fortunate to be the medical director of Merge Australia, and I've also got other hats in senior clinical lecturer at Macquarie University Department of Medicine, because we're working on trying to develop diagnostic plans. Because if you don't have a diagnostic test, it's very hard to diagnose these conditions from history. I want to talk about the doctor training. I've seen, I've been a lecturer for the last 3 years trying to train GPs through GPCE. From here, I've been working through the College of GPs. And probably got to about 3,000 doctors somewhere, and I realise how inadequately they're trained. I have a lot of knowledge about it, but you can't put to a doctor who doesn't need to have implementing this is very difficult. And difficulties for patients when you present to these people. In 1 week's time, I'm retiring, and I'm going into part-time research into ME/CFS and related disorders for the rest of my career, because I think that's where I'm best used. The national guidelines are coming in 3 years. Now, that's not helpful for this time now. That's great, and I think we met them. And absolutely, the guidelines from 22 years ago were useless 22 years ago, and they are useless now. They did not address, they did not hear what happened to patients. And I've been involved with this condition for over 27 years. I've seen 6,000 patients in my career, and recently we've seen about 1,000 patients with long COVID in my career, and 7,000 patients that I hopefully have some positive impact with in the group that I work with. Look, 250,000 patients probably have ME/CFS, and it's a rubbery figure because we don't really know. I'll talk about that later. But there's over 300,000 people with long COVID now, and half of them have the criteria to be diagnosed with ME/CFS. So there's an absolute number of people, that could be 500,000, that could be more.
How long will you get to kind of like recognise
that's exactly right. But look, 90% of these patients, these people, do not have a doctor. 25% of them are housebound and bedridden.
That's 5%. That's 75% of them.
Yes,
We'll be here all day.
That's 60,000 people. So we obviously need to have some urgent funding for training of doctors. Every doctor needs to know how to diagnose ME/CFS and long COVID, because it's really important that we as doctors, because one of the difficulties is it's not taught as undergraduates, we're not taught as GP registrars, and most GPs, being time poor, aren't encouraged to learn some of these evolving illnesses. Probably long COVID has given us an opportunity to highlight ME/CFS. But the training of doctors and the funding of that training needs to happen before the next election. It doesn't have. It can't be after the next election and put off for a later time.
It's also special.
So, now, there are clinical guidelines available already, and there are diagnostic and treatment pathways internationally recognised that I teach that are available now. Without a guideline, you don't need a guideline. That verifies what you already know. That's what the guideline's about. These are evolving illnesses, so these can be taught now by qualified doctors, training doctors who take up the pattern of seeing individual patients and being able to go through a process of diagnosis. Because otherwise what happens is this medical gaslighting. failure to diagnose, failure to treat is medical negligence. It's really when patients tell me this story over and over again, the first thing I say to a patient when I spend an hour with them and they say, I say, well, you're safe now, you stay here, I'm going to look after you. I suppose I'm in a privileged position because I chose to just see ME/CFS patients 27 years ago, but there needs to be more of us doing that because this is a huge burden of people with a huge stigma upon them that don't actually have a voice, and don't actually have a voice. Now, let me finish. Then you can ask us some questions. So, disability support pensions, NDIS, income protection, absolutely need to be improved and supported by GPs. The problem is the whole fact that GPs don't know how to try and give a representation to these organisations to actually get these this funding for individual patients. All the long COVID clinics in Australia are now closed. But I can tell you there's hundreds, thousands of people with long COVID out there. Now 50% of people with long COVID get ME/CFS, and the burden is coming back to those patients. And again, they don't have doctors. Now, to summarise, and then you can ask me some questions. The most important thing we need to do is fund GP education now, not next month, not next year. Funding now to actually start the training process of all doctors, and that can probably include specialists. I think that should be something we should be looking at straight away. The second thing is, like I'm letting go, in my practice, 730 patients with ME/CFS, and I finish in 60 of those patients are housebound and bedridden. The only reason they get Medicare is I go to their house once a year to activate their Medicare and health. We automatically need to change Medicare. So if you're stuck at home with with ME/CFS or long COVID, you can't get to the doctor. There must be some provision through Medicare to provide funding immediately for those patients and not to be gaslighted and told, oh no, you can't have Medicare because you haven't seen the doctor face to face. Well, that's going to stop. That can happen now. Just face your thing on them. The future also requires undergraduates, people training in medicine in universities, and GP registrars need to know about this health. They need to be trained. I've been teaching students for years. The students that came to me all know about ME/CFS. They've become very good doctors because they actually listen. The most important thing about looking after people with ME/CFS, you've got to hear their story. You've got to give time to it. And the last thing I want to say is notification. If you don't notify an therapist that's involved in like ME/CFS from long COVID, how do you know what the disease burden in the community is? So not only have we got to train the doctors getting care sorted, but we've got to know how many there are on the street. But, we've got to 250,000 and then 300,000. I saw one statistic up to 1 million people would have long COVID, and if half of those develop ME/CFS, we have a serious problem. If we get more pandemics, we're going to have more issues. So, thank you, and I'm happy to field any questions and advice.
I just want to add on that those people who aren't seeing doctors, and lots of people will choose not to see doctors, even if they can because of the treatment. And that's their GPs, that's the specialists they need. They're also not getting dental. They're not getting pathology. They're not seeing the optometrist. They're not having pap smears, mammograms, like all these other things. And like there is no way that those people can access those things. So it's across other areas, and that impacts other health programs.
Sorry, I did have a question. Thank you, Richard. That's spot on. I 100% agree with you. So thank you for putting that out. In the middle there, you were talking about doctors and doctors not. I got the feeling from you that a lot of them, in their busy days, I totally understand busy days, and I understand this GP needs to be performed and handed out. And I understand their pressures with time and Medicare and business and all that sort of stuff. But if we wanted to force them to have a look at what they need to know, can we tie it to their insurance?
No, I think the doctors are time poor, but when I've been getting my courses through GBC, 1 hour was spent on how do you actually work up a patient with ME/CFS. So you might have seen it for the 15-minute consult. The second consult, they come back for half an hour. And there's a process of training and education that allows the doctor to actually start realising they need to give more time, more effort, more continuity for long-term care of their patients with MCFS, which could be right. So I think, it's not the doctors are interested, they're ill-equipped, they're not trained, they don't have the skill, and to have the skill, you've got to have time. So that's partly Medicare, item numbers and things like this, but that's improved. The radio has given us a number of like which is my standard Medicare rebate consult, and that helps. There's all kind of diseases you need the doctor, and you are like, this is just doctor.
And we have a complicated, like I've worked in the training in the first 4 years of training, and like even with their complex cases, like there's nowhere near like what they're actually trained in terms of complex cases. It wasn't even, we never
don't learn complex medicine in undergraduate.
No, but
we learn it as postgraduates, and I just haven't got an interest in this area. And I don't have MSc.
The thing is, because of my information, so I don't know how to get in there. It's complicated.
Well, you need an intellectual input for doctors so they grasp you, so they actually fully understand what's happening.
I guess it's like everyone in the community, like people come into contact with, it means there's an awareness of within and children, so these kind of conditions in undergraduate years, it's not really obscure condition.
Just double checking that before we move on. Do you have any questions online, Dr. Sheffield, or can I let Richard have any remarks? Help us some time. We're all good. Wonderful. Thank you. Oh, I don't think he's going anywhere.
I'm sorry.
So thank you. So I'm conscious of time, that does take us about halfway through. So we've obviously got the two areas remaining. One of the areas I'm really conscious of, and I think a number of us have spoken about this, is we do pride ourselves on our universal health system with that safety net, an idea that no matter who you are, you have the support that's needed. And I think more often than not in rooms like this, we work out how often that's coming apart and how often there are those gaps in care. So we've got two videos, one will follow the other, that I really want to thank our patient advocates for putting their voices forward on these issues around equity of access and how do we guarantee that full range of services, whether it is MDOS, other foundational supports or MBS item numbers, whether we actually have the access to care that we need. So our first video is from Penelope McMillan. She's a spokesperson for ME/CFS Australia, and hers is really designed around designing that issue around MBS items. So I'd like to thank her. She's a massive advocate for ageing, carers, disability, chronic disease, especially ME/CFS, and her work includes engagement in research, including co-authorship and representing people with ME/CFS in local, state, national and international areas.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. The Medicare Benefits Schedule Review Advisory Committee, or MRAC, is currently reviewing MBS allied health chronic disease management services to ensure allied health chronic disease management services adequately support patients with chronic conditions. ME/CFS is a complex chronic condition commonly associated with comorbidities. Medicare subsidised individual allied health services are currently limited to 5 services per year per patient. I'm about to show some slides with allied health providers on it, and there's a caveat. Clinical guidance for ME/CFS consistently emphasises that health service providers must have knowledge of and training in ME/CFS to reduce the risk of harm from ill-informed treatments and management. Now, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK has their guidelines reflect the complexity. Specialist teams consist of a range of healthcare professionals with training and experience in assessing, diagnosing, treating and managing ME/CFS. They commonly have medically trained clinicians from a variety of specialisms, including rheumatology, rehabilitation medicine, endocrinology, infectious diseases, neurology, immunology, general practice, and paediatrics, as well as access to other healthcare professionals specialising in ME/CFS. And here's our allied health providers. These may include physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, occupational therapists, dietitians, and clinical or counselling psychologists. The Centers for Disease Control, the CDC in the US, has guidance that suggests physical therapy professionals, mental health professionals, and rehabilitation professionals. And it's up to us to infer which Australian allied health professions those are. The British Medical Journal Best Practice Guide for ME/CFS was updated in May 2024. The authors are James Baranoik from Georgetown University and Sonia Marshall-Gridisnik and Natalie Eaton-Fitch from the National Centre for Neuroimmunology and Emerging Diseases at Griffith University. They recommend a physiotherapist, occupational therapist, dietitian and psychologist. And there's a nurse-led protocol for multidisciplinary care in general practice that has been trialled in multiple general practices in Australia. It was developed by Bridges and Pathways Institute, a charity member of MECFS Australia. They recommend an exercise physiologist, physiotherapist, including neurophysiotherapist, occupational therapist, psychologist, and dietitian. Now, access to general practice is a prerequisite for access to MBS subsidised allied health care. Barriers include being homebound and bedridden, poverty due to low engagement in paid employment and sometimes the need for carers to reduce paid employment, and our post-exertional malaise, such that clinic visits make symptoms worse and reduce functional capacity. NICE says service providers should be proactive and flexible in delivering services, including home visits, online or phone consultations, and supplying written communication. The CDC says these patients often cannot make make office visits due to the severity of their symptoms. They require in-home assistance and phone or online checkups. All this amounts to people with ME/CFS needing, firstly, access to general practice. We need access to telehealth without the qualifying annual face-to-face GP consultation. We need GP clinics to be able to financially support home visits by their GPs and practice nurses. And then we need access to the allied health services. We need access to MBS subsidies for allied health at a level that allows people living in poverty to afford allied health care. We need access to an annual number of MBS subsidised allied health services that reflect the illness complexity and comorbidities. There's the potential here to slow or reverse deterioration with potential savings to health, welfare and disability services. However, this will not occur without political support and the support of the Department of Health and Aged Care to empower MRAC to develop proposals that reflect clinical guidance for ME/CFS. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carla and I am speaking today in my capacity as leader of ME Advocacy Network Australia. To start with, on behalf of the more than 250,000 Australians living with ME/CFS, I would like to thank Emerge Australia and Senator Steele John for organising this and hosting this important event. For patients with ME/CFS to have an opportunity to be heard and to feel seen by members of Parliament, senators and government officials is of great significance to our community. The challenges people with ME/CFS face in relation to the NDIS, both in terms of access and once they are participants, is a vast topic, but today I will be focusing on challenges with access, particularly for people whose impairments are so severe they are unable to navigate a complex system with almost a completely different language. For those of us without carers, it is a monumental challenge to prepare our applications due to our severe impairments. From my own experience, it took 5.5 years from starting to prepare my application to my planning meeting. There are support organisations for other neurological conditions such as multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease who receive funding to support their members through NDIS processes, including access and planning. We also need funding for specific training for navigators and advocates to help people with ME/CFS and carers to navigate the processes and know what language to use and what documents need to be provided. Proposed foundational supports desperately need to make a practical difference to patients' lives, patients who still may be able to work if they have some help for essential tasks such as house cleaning, gardening and meal preparation. To support people with ME/CFS to potentially remain employed, to maintain relationships, and to have the chance to not functionally deteriorate further is to allow them to maintain the dignity and privilege of a life participating in society, in relationships with family and friends, and to not be wholly dependent on government support. Being able to access appropriate foundational supports prior to declining to a level of severe functional impairment eligible for NDIS access not only reduces the number of people needing to apply for NDIS access, but also ensures a higher quality of life for patients. Foundational supports will also be essential for those who meet the eligibility criteria for NDIS access but have been unable to prepare their applications or who are going through the access and appeals processes. I would like to suggest funding an online educational platform in the vein of the GP education modules that are accredited for continuing professional development for relevant professions and can also be used to inform other professionals such as advocates, support coordinators, soon to become navigators, support workers, and NDIS staff, especially assessors, planners, and managers of client service areas. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Is to talk about that need of ongoing research. And I appreciate it's always a balancing act in a room like this where there is an ongoing right now to also be talking about research. But the reality is our standard of care doesn't improve if we don't have it. So to speak on that need and the importance of government investment in this space, I'd like to introduce Emeritus Professor Paul Fisher, who chairs Emerge Australia's Medical and Scientific Advisory Committee. He helps to shape the health priorities and research priorities for the organisation. He's the former head of microbiology, Department of Physiology, Anatomy and Microbiology at Redgrave University. I'm sure that's just not designed to trip up first thing on Monday morning. But with research interests in the study of neurodegenerative disease, mitochondrial biology, Parkinson's disease, and the role of mitochondria in disease, including around white blood cells and in CFS patients. I get points for getting that all right. His groundbreaking work is widely published and recognises the complexity of this disease and the work we have to go ahead to be able to understand it further. So thank you, Professor Fisher, for stepping up today.
Thank you. Yes, the complexity of the disease you've already heard about from some of the patients. They can tell the story of what it's like living with it much better than I, so I'm not going to try to do that. My daughter actually has MCFS as well, but she's at the mild end of the spectrum, so her story is nowhere near as compelling as the stories that we've heard today. MCFS has been the elephant in the room for a long time, not only in the medical profession, but also in research. And as a consequence of that, the average funding for MCFS research, biomedical research, over the last 3 decades has not been much more than about $150,000 per annum. This is for a disease that, economically speaking, is costing the country of the order of $15 billion per annum. And that's a big difference. The number of patients that you're talking about in relation to MCFS, as you've heard already, is 250 to 500,000. That's more than we have with Parkinson's disease, which I also work on. And yet the funding for research into it is an order of magnitude less than is available for Parkinson's disease. So MCFS is a complicated, complex illness, but it is also a neglected illness, not only amongst the medical profession, but also in the research community, and that's because of the lack of funding. So, with that small amount of funding, Australian researchers have been making key findings in the area of what is wrong with cells in MCFS cells. And I just want to mention 3 of those things. Some of this work is from my lab, some of it from others. But basically, in cells called the mitochondria in blood cells, they're called mitochondrial in all cells, but in blood cells, they are producing the energy currency of the cell, the ATP of the cell, the fuel of the cell, about 25% less efficiently than in normal healthy control cells. Now that makes a big difference because the cell tries to adapt to that, and when it tries to adapt to that, it basically turns on all of its energy compensatory mechanisms to try to produce more. So in the normal state for that cell, it is already maxed out in terms of what it can possibly do. So an MCFS patient can't ask more of it. It's already running at its maximum. So the cytopathology, the cellular damage and any sort of problems in ME/CFS involves inefficient energy production, and that is related to disturbed signaling inside the cell, signaling pathways that control mitochondrial energy production, and it involves disturbed compensatory energy metabolism. Australian researchers have made big contributions to this in this trickle of funding. I keep thinking how much more we could have done if we had been funded better over those 10 years. But even so, let me tell you some of the things that we have been finding most recently. We've been looking at biomarkers, for example. And many of you in the audience and the recent press people are really well informed about science will understand the general dogma of molecular biology. DNA has the information to make RNA, which conveys the information to the cell to make proteins, and proteins do the functions. And at each of those levels, you can find abnormalities in ME/CFS cells. And to give you a feeling for that, 16% of more than 14,000 white blood cell RNA molecules we've measured, 16% of them have abnormal levels in ME/CFS cells. 17% of them in cultured cell lines that we've made for patients. 8% of over 3,000 proteins at abnormal levels in cultured cells from ME/CFS patients. 10% of about 300 different small molecules that we measured in ME/CFS patient cells are at abnormal levels. 11% of the molecules that make up cell membranes are at abnormal levels in ME/CFS cells. That shows you the extent of the dysregulation in the cells from ME/CFS patients. You can take those thousands of differences and you can write some software that allows us to search those thousands of differences and ask for a diagnostic subset. And with subsets of only 7 RNA molecules from ME/CFS, white blood cells, 5 cultured cell line RNA molecules, or 8 proteins, or 7 fatty molecules from membranes, we can identify and distinguish ME/CFS cells from control cells with close to 100% accuracy. We can also identify the severity of the illness. We can correlate the severity of the illness with these changes, and we can correlate that with a subset of 4 white blood cell RNA molecules, or 5 cell line RNA molecules, or 8 cell line proteins. This has been done with a trickle of funds, but it had to be done, therefore, with small samples. We're talking, in the case of our work, 20 to 30 patients, 20 to 30 controlled cell lines. And that's not enough to know for sure that you've got the right molecules, that you found the right ones for diagnostic tests. If we had more funding, we could have done it ages ago. But so I'm a bit frustrated. And I'm getting old. But we really think that research matters because diagnosis matters. You know that you have to have ME/CFS for 6 months before you can get a diagnosis. If one of these things could be turned into a clinically useful test, you could get it straight away. And that would make a huge difference. It would also help validate your illness with the GP that you're speaking with. So they would understand this is real, this matters, and it is accurately diagnosed by blood testing. That's where we're putting a lot of our efforts now.
Is there any questions?
I'm kind of keen to say that, I know there's a lot of focus on diagnostic tests, and as a patient and having been through this and probably knowing thousands, if not tens of thousands of patients, we know enough things. And we all know that the processes we went through, we could have been diagnosed very early and not given harmful advice. And as much as diagnostic testing is important, we can already diagnose this without a diagnostic test. And Because as much, we don't need to prove to doctors that it's the same thing because we can find a text in patients' figures and children, their circumstances, because we can diagnose that. That's called medical history data, which doctors will do. Yeah.
I make a comment there. That's exactly what we come to do is develop a diagnostic test. We get a diagnostic test and we get you earlier, and we understand the pathogenesis, the disease process of your illness. That's going to give us a better chance of finding a treatment.
I appreciate that.
And that's
There's amazing times where we can diagnose people. You know, like there's certain things that may.
Diagnosis and treatment and taking somebody from this to an improved state is really what.
Yeah, that's great. But the thing is, like, okay, so 6 months, that deadline, right? I remember this process. I wasn't diagnosed within 6 months. When you then have no money, you've lost your job, you've lost your housing, your income, your friends, your family, then you're got to go to Centrelink, but you can't go to Centrelink, but then you're interviewed by Centrelink, they say, you're going to pay how long in sick leave, right? You can't think right then. In like a year and a half, what's wrong with you? I don't know, okay. Are you going to be sick for 2 years? You're like, oh, great, no, you're not. And okay, so now you're not qualifying for the death. And so these are the interreactions with social services that affect people's lives and cause more trauma and heavier burdens of trauma on the people who are going through this primary state of illness, which could be receiving care and support around that first bit, they don't develop into more severe cases. So that's the kind of concern from the patient side is, great, we can do this and wait for that. Remember, we can't diagnose.
Look, you are completely right. The case definition at the moment requires 6 months. What if you could get that diagnosis immediately? Yeah. And the other thing about MCFS is, as you know, is that while you're undiagnosed and even after diagnosis, you can be caught up in a spiral, in a downward spiral of worsening health because people don't know how to treat you.
Yeah, and you're the wrong one.
And through diagnosis, you're also in that spiral. If you could get diagnosed earlier and treated earlier, you could avoid that spiral potentially.
You know,
and then
50 doctors in that 3 months.
No, I say something, you know, I think the difference would be you wouldn't have to get, because it's a diagnosis of last resort, right? So before you can be diagnosed with that, you have to be tested up the wazoo for absolutely.
It's not really just diagnosis.
But you can eliminate that. I mean, there were so many times that in the end, I wanted a positive test result back. I wanted something to come back and so I would have something I could say, this is what's wrong with me. To be able to get that straight away, it stops. I don't know, to me, it would have helped me come to terms with my condition and my situation.
Me too. I remember the same thing. I remember time having had a negative leukemia test, right? You know, except we can have this diagnosis in contention when people show up with an incurable, very severe, all of a sudden situation that looks a lot like MCFS.
But when I first show up, I'm going to want my doctor. If they can't diagnose me with MCFS straight away,
No, but like
and I haven't been
in
sick for it for like a month, I'm going to want my doctor to run with that.
You've been sick for 3 months and you've got certain sets of symptoms and it's looking a little bit like it could be this way.
You still eliminate those other things.
That's true, but we need to have careful care. I think it comes down to that. Because everyone said in those 3 months, look, you need to get back to it and just have a positive attitude. Here's some antidepressants.
And I think
right, then we're having causing damage to patients, right? So it's got to be considered in that.
Part of this is part of what you're saying is how political processes exacerbate these situations. Because the dynamic you just described with the DSP as an example, that process that you have to go through.
And it's worse with the
It has been under the I suppose it's been politically designed. So it does not need to be that.
We also have international law. We're subject to this, and we have to have these sounds. We've been hammered by the UN. We have been hammered because we suck at this. We are the worst in the OECD.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's got to change. So we can say all these political processes, but we are actually held to a higher account. And we are there.
Absolutely, we need to change.
I think the universal thing that I think we've all agreed on today, and if I use an analogy that another advocacy group once said, they were 5 Ks into the 42 Ks. amounts on. I think we could say we're probably less than a K into A42K, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done ahead. I think we've spoken about those areas today. I'm very conscious of time. I know Jordan's diary and what else, and we're going to get literally kicked from this room. But I do want to introduce Dr. Freelander, who has quickly snuck in during that last kind of conversation, just during the fun ones. I feel like you always come in, Mike.
Thanks.
Mike is one of the most passionate MPs for senior MES, but I would say he's also one of the most passionate healthcare MPs we have in this parliament. I think he is an incredible advocate for health generally. He leads the health and ageing and aged care support standing committee with the House of Representatives, which keeps him incredibly busy on almost every topic known to man. But it also brings incredible expertise and experience into this parliament. So thank you very much for being here today. And I know you'd like to make a few words.
Yeah, look, thanks very much for having me. I try not to speak, but it's been quite a busy day today. But look, I just want to say a few words. And I acknowledge the work that Jordan's doing in health as well, and his passionate advocacy. I think that in my life I've seen our medical profession criticised appropriately and inappropriately. And I would say that much of the criticism that's occurring now around ME and CFS is justified. And I say that following our parliamentary inquiry that we had into ME, that we are taking the wrong approach. And the approach that we should be taking is this is a group of people. We know that there can be some causes for MECFS, but our focus should be on the well-being of this group of patients. And yes, it's important that other things are excluded, I get that, as do my medical colleagues, but we need to focus on the needs of those patients first and foremost. And the way that we should do that, and I think we emphasise that in our report, that it should be eligible for support through the social security system, number one, because adding or compounding to the effect of illness is uncertainty about income, about housing, about access to quick care. So first of all, we should look at financial support as priority. Secondly, we should look at expertise and have standards of excellence available for people to understand. I'm no expert in this, chronic fatigue syndrome, whatever label people want to use, but I know that this is a group of people that are struggling at the moment to access support, and that should be our second task, to get them access to support. And thirdly, we need to look at emerging treatments and research into underlying causes and long-term We have recommended this, and the Minister has certainly looked upon all these recommendations favourably. I am hopeful that we will continue to provide research, medical research. What I have worked on with some people, my constituents, is trying to get them access to social security support early rather than late, rather than putting people through the trauma of having to struggle to just get a roof over their heads. Yes, that's right, and it compounds the stress. Unfortunately, we have a system designed that looks at very concrete evidence and black and white test results. We know that that's not possible for us. So they're the three things that we should be focusing on. In particular, I think much more research needs to occur, which is why we saw a real uptick in NHS cases post-pandemic and during the pandemic, and what are the emerging trends for that cohort. But it's still a work in progress. I can't guarantee you that there will be a huge increase in research funding. There will be a budget that is constrained by trying to reduce spending. But I am hopeful there will be changes within the social security system that will enable people to get access to support, financial support sooner rather than later. I understand your distress, and I understand in many ways people's feeling of abandonment, because I think that's it to me. Right.
And that's one of the things. And it's like, I'm sorry to use this language differently because a lot of our community uses language to cope what they're actually going through in a more positive way.
Sure.
So, yeah, I'm sorry to use these words intentionally to represent.
Well, I think we need to try and move away, if you like, from that form of
blame, if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think though the collaborative relationship has to be well understood, and the trauma is within the group of people who are long-term ill, so over a few years, that entire community has CP, like medically calls PTSD. And that's an additional diagnosis. So those kind of things are the contributing factors. And yeah, and I mean, at that point, we have to start kind of recognising it, like the harm, because they experience harm.
I still think there is a problem, and I think it's a problem amongst my medical colleagues.
Yeah.
And I know they always push very hard for this concept of defensive excellence in supporting and getting people access to them. I think that is really important.
Yeah, it's complex, it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And I would think the doctors would be like, yeah, this is a great get into it. But no, they're not mathematicians.
Yeah.
Like,
People don't understand
they
it.
don't have
Therefore, are very prone to dismissing.
Yeah.
So that's all I can say. I will have to
No, thank you, Kimberly. I really appreciate it.
but you know, the needs of the argument are being understood by the government.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're running out of this, but we have got there. I do want to thank, before I do ask Anne just to do a bit of a wrap up and encourage everyone to come and share some lunch, I think a lot of our speakers aren't going anywhere, so there's an opportunity that I know there's some questions during that we can table to them then over sandwiches. I would like to take all the time to thank all the speakers who have generously given their time today to update obviously the community on developments, but critically I think come together behind what is action. I think we can all recognise there is a long way to go from an advocacy perspective, and from anyone that's been involved in advocacy will tell you that does take time. I also want to thank the Honourable Mark Butler as Minister of Health for coming this morning, for Senator Steele-John for donating quite a decent period of time, and what I will say again is a very crazy couple of sitting weeks, and obviously Dr. McMahon for joining us at the end, but also the other MPs who were able to join us. I'd also like to thank everyone for coming in today. I appreciate this is a very involved space for many of you, and you all carry your individual experiences, and you're all trying to do everything you can to ensure that not only your own life experience, the life of your family members who are living it, but also ensuring that no other Australians have to live it and going through it right moment. So I want to thank you for coming today and appreciate the effort that's involved. I don't know if Anne's joining me, otherwise I'm going to close. Yes, she is. Otherwise, no, it's always a balancing act. Is there any final remarks you would like to share before? I think Jordan is keen to get a photo with all of us.
Yeah, we'll do a group photo.
Yeah, so maybe some final observations for you.
Just a couple of things. When I made my opening remarks today, I pledged that this meeting would put the voices of people with lived experience front and centre. And I hope you agree that that's what we've done, because we believe that's the only way we're going to be able to achieve the kind of change that must occur in Australia on behalf of people with MCFS. We've touched on the key areas, of course, of clinical guidelines, and thank you, Alan, for your presentation. And we know this is a complex space, and we look forward to hearing more and working with you. Obviously, clinical education is at the core of creating progress for patients. if our GPs are not educated and they know nothing about ME/CFS, then what will continue is the gaslighting of patients, and they will continue to not be believed. And as I stated, that just can't go on. And so all of us here in this room are committed to ensuring that we advocate and push for proper clinical education, which needs to continue before, during and after our guidelines have been reviewed and developed. Clearly, the area of patient support services is key. We need patients to be able to access the kinds of supports that they need in order to be able to function and live the best possible quality of life that they can without stigma or discrimination. And finally, we need the research. When you look at other disease groups, whether they're a chronic disease or not, you have screening, you have diagnostic biomarkers, you have testing. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could know ahead of time who's more likely to develop ME/CFS, whether from an infection or from something else, because we know what the state of their mitochondria might be. So we need dedicated ME/CFS research, and that's why we've pushed all of the recommendations in the long-term inquiry report that include all of them. And we've been successful as a sector in having clinical guidelines funded by the Minister. So I would like to once again acknowledge the work of ME/CFS Australia, and there are many of you here today, Bridges and Pathways, ME Advocacy Network Australia, and the ME Group Australia, sorry, I get my acronyms confused, for making this event possible. I do want to stress and say to all of you that putting an event on like this is challenging, and Parliament House Canberra is an extremely challenging venue. It doesn't cater well for people with disabilities, and for all of those that are listening online, we're sorry that we had an interruption in the video. We know you've been able to hear everything, and that is all because this House doesn't actually allow us to be able to do the things we need to be able to have an online audience participate fully, and we apologise for that. I thank my staff who are back in Melbourne feeding us questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all questions. I want to thank the staff that are here today. James and Clark, who's done a stellar job. She works in development, but as a result of Qantas cancelling the flight of our AV specialist who was meant to be here, he couldn't be here, so we've now got my development advisor who's been managing everything here so that we can get everything up on the screens and get at least audio out there and have some questions raised. So Jane, you've done a sterling job. Thank you very much.
If we can say that there has been challenges with the audio, we will do our best, and I'm very grateful to our colleague Andrea who is tidying up, Laura, Rochelle and all the team, not only in Melbourne but all around the country who are helping us to tidy things up, and we're hoping within 48 hours to have this online for everybody to be able to listen to again. Please keep your eye on socials for the link to the website where we'll be presenting the audio in the best way that we possibly can. Thank you for your patience.
I want to once again thank Jordan. Jordan, it's just been such a pleasure to have you here for most of the meeting. You give the community so much confidence that you see them and that you hear them and that you understand them. And it's such a comfort for us all to have you here. So thank you, and also to Dr. Mike Freelander in his absence, and obviously having the Honourable Mark Butler here at the beginning of the meeting was absolutely special. And so thank you everybody who is here today. If you've got any questions, lunch is going to be served. You can talk to a number of people. Thank you to Peter Laney.
Just before we go into any further, very much thank you to Emily who did so much. Just want to clarify that in terms of lunch.
Grab and go.
It's about what we have to do
He
is
needs to get out and back in for a coffee, otherwise something's gonna happen.
There's coffees in the public area. We can take you out there. There's coffees there.
The Queen's Terrace.
Yeah.
So just before we leave the table, just so that we know what's going to happen logistically now, we'll do a group photo together, and then we will head out through those doors into the corridor. And myself.
Go this way. Go this way. Down that way. Out the door.
I will be in front, and I will be behind. Please stay in the group. Getting back to the public area where there is food and coffee and more coffee.
So close to fruit.
So I just where are we? Just come over here. We'll go to the other side.